The alarm pierced the silence of the bridge like a blade through fabric. Commander Taylor didn't even flinch anymore. For the last 18 cycles, that sound had become the soundtrack of her existence, marking every cascading failure that turned her proud fleet into drifting space junk. The holographic screen in front of her flashed a deep, angry red. Cargo Ship 7 was reporting a secondary fusion reactor collapse. Another 20% efficiency lost. Taylor ran her fingers over the controls, silencing the alarm with a gesture she had repeated so many times, her muscles anticipated the move. Outside the viewports, the convoy stretched out like worn beads on a broken necklace. 12 ships that were once magnificent now displayed scorched hulls, torn panels, and flickering lights where the steady glow of life should have been. 40,000 souls depended on these technological carcasses to survive the relentless vacuum. 40,000 out of 8 billion. Taylor forced her thoughts away from the spiral of grief that threatened to consume her. There was no luxury for mourning, not yet. First, she had to ensure those 40,000 had a chance, however small. Lieutenant Miller approached, his shoulders slumped in a sign of extreme exhaustion. He hadn't slept since the catastrophic hyperspace jump that left them adrift in this remote sector. None of them had truly slept. "Commander, the calculations are ready," Miller said, his voice carrying that raspy tone that came from breathing too much recycled air. "At the current rate of system degradation, we have 46 hours before the life support on the civilian ships fails completely. The patrol ships might hold out for another 60 hours, maybe 70 if we shut down the auxiliary thrusters." Taylor nodded slowly. The numbers were worse than she had anticipated, but not surprising. She had learned to accept the inevitable with a coldness that would have horrified the version of herself from 3 weeks ago, back when she still commanded the orbital defense of her home world. 3 weeks. It felt like a geological era. "Status of the pursuit fleet?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The Imperial ships were as relentless as death itself. Miller tapped his handheld console. 18 Dominion-class warships are holding formation at 3 astronomical units. They know we have nowhere to go. They're pushing us toward the Charon Nebula. The nebula. Taylor turned her gaze toward the massive formation dominating the space ahead. Dense clouds of ionized gas glowed in sinister shades of red and purple, shot through with radiation lightning that could fry electronics in seconds. It was a perfect trap. Entering meant certain death. Staying here meant guaranteed extermination. "Any response to the distress calls?" Taylor asked, knowing she was only asking out of formality. Miller hesitated. That silence said everything. "None, Commander. 17 transmissions sent to every known faction. The Andros Confederation, the Sirius Free Republic, the Arcturus Collective, even the independent traders of Vega. Every frequency open, every diplomatic protocol followed." He paused, his eyes weary. Absolute silence on all channels. Taylor felt something harden in her chest. It wasn't anger exactly. Anger required energy she no longer possessed. It was something colder, sharper, a profound disappointment with existence itself. The galaxy had decided. The hegemonic empire was too powerful to cross. Helping refugees meant inviting annihilation. Better to close the doors, turn off the receivers, and pretend the screams in the dark didn't exist. "Commander," Miller's voice brought her back. "Your orders?" Taylor looked at the 12 ships again. Each one carried entire families, children who didn't yet fully understand that their world had been turned into nuclear ash, elders who carried millennia of cultural history that now only existed in their fragmented memories. She made her decision. "Prepare a final transmission," she said, her voice taking on that command tone forged in elite military academies and tempered in the fires of total war. "Wide spectrum, all frequencies, no encryption. I want every civilization in this godforsaken galaxy to hear what I have to say." Miller blinked, surprised. "Commander, an open transmission will reveal our exact position to the Empire." "They already know exactly where we are, Lieutenant. They're just savoring the hunt." Taylor moved to the center of the bridge, where the holographic transmitter waited. "Set it to record and continuous relay. This message needs to survive, even if we don't." As Miller prepared the equipment, Taylor organized her thoughts. There would be no dramatic pleas, no empty emotional appeals, just the raw, cutting truth. The red recording light flickered on. "Attention, all nations and factions of the galaxy. This is Commander Taylor of the Valanis people, representing the last 40,000 survivors of our civilization. 18 cycles ago, our homeworld was attacked without provocation by the hegemonic empire. 8 billion lives were extinguished in 48 hours. We are what remains." Taylor kept her tone steady, professional. She wouldn't let her voice break. "We sent 17 formal requests for asylum and humanitarian assistance. We respected every diplomatic protocol. We offered compensation, technological knowledge, even voluntary service in exchange for sanctuary for our civilians. The response was universal silence. You chose fear over decency." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "I don't blame you. The Empire is powerful, and survival is a primal instinct. But I want this message to stand as a historical record. When the Empire turns its attention to you, and it will, remember that you helped teach the universe a terrible lesson. That compassion is weakness, that justice is optional, and that the cries of the innocent can be safely ignored." Taylor took a deep breath. "This is our final transmission. Within hours, the Empire will complete its genocide. May the stars be witnesses to your cowardice. Commander Taylor, signing off." The red light went out. Miller looked at her with a mix of admiration and sadness. "Message set for continuous relay on all bands. It will echo for weeks, maybe months." "Good," Taylor said. "Now, prepare the patrol ships. 5 ships. Volunteer crews only. We're going to form a defensive line between the civilian fleet and the Empire. If we can buy just a few extra hours, maybe the civilians can reach the edge of the nebula and find some rock formation to hide in." "Commander, that's tactical suicide. 5 ships against 18? "I know, Miller, but it's the only move we have left." Taylor placed a hand on her officer's shoulder. "Coordinate the evacuation of non-essential personnel from the patrols to the civilian ships. I only want experienced combatants on the guns. People who understand this is a one-way trip." In the following minutes, the bridge transformed into controlled activity. Orders were transmitted. Volunteers stepped forward in numbers far greater than needed, forcing Taylor to make cruel choices about who would have the right to die first. The 5 patrol ships undocked from the main convoy, their maneuvering thrusters spitting pale blue flames as they took up defensive formation. They were agile vessels, designed for scouting and quick skirmishes. not for facing heavy warships. Taylor personally took command of the lead ship, the Aurora's Spear. From the command station, she could see the entire formation. Her comrades, some she had known since the academy, others she had met only in these last desperate weeks, all prepared to give their lives for a cause already lost. Detecting movement in the Imperial fleet, the sensor officer announced. They're accelerating. Estimated time to weapons range, 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Taylor checked the Spear's weapons systems. Plasma cannons at 70% capacity, antimatter missiles reduced to 3 salvos, deflector shields operating at 40% efficiency against 18 Imperial warships in full combat condition. All units, hold formation, she broadcasted. Focus on concentrated fire, target thrusters, and shield generators. If we can disable just 2 or 3 ships, we've done our job. The affirmative responses came back quickly. Professionals to the end. Taylor watched as the distance closed. The Imperial ships were impressive constructions, angular hulls covered in ablative armor, weapon banks that could vitrify entire planets. They came in a wolfpack formation, confident in their overwhelming superiority. 6 minutes to range. The civilian convoy behind them began to move slowly toward the nebula. It was as pathetic as it was brave. Damaged ships, pushing their reactors past safety limits in one last desperate bid for survival. 3 minutes. Taylor felt a strange calm descend over her. So this was how it ended. Not with triumph or glory, but with one last gesture of defiance against the inevitable. At least they would die on their own terms. 1 minute. Prepare to open fire at maximum range. The plasma cannons built up energy, humming with deadly anticipation. And then, something impossible happened. Every sensor on the bridge exploded in simultaneous alerts. The sensor officer stared at her screen with an expression of absolute disbelief. Commander, contact emerging from the nebula. Massive energy signature, unknown pattern. It's huge. Taylor spun around, her eyes locking onto the tactical display. From the dense curtain of ionized gas in the Charon Nebula, something was emerging. At first, it was just a shadow, distorted by radiation fields. Then, a shape began to materialize. It wasn't just big, it was colossal. A hull that looked like it had been forged in the furnaces of dying stars, scarred by the marks of countless battles, emerged from the nebula depths. The ship had an aggressive geometry, all brutal angles and surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon turrets dotted its length like spines on a predatory creature. Identification? Taylor demanded, her voice tight. The sensor officer worked frantically. Processing. Commander, the language patterns detected in the communication emissions don't match any known faction. Wait, the computer found a match in the historical archives. A pause that felt like an eternity. Language identified as Standard Terran. Match probability, 98%. Taylor felt her blood run cold. That's impossible. The Terrans went extinct 3 centuries ago. The whole galaxy knows that. But the evidence was right there, solid and imposing, blocking the path between the convoy and the Imperial fleet. And as Taylor watched, a communication signal crossed the void, transmitted on frequencies that hadn't been used in generations. A human voice, firm and loaded with a determination that cut through the stars like a heated blade, echoed on all open channels. Attention, Imperial forces. This is Captain Elena Volkov of the Terran Defense Fleet, commanding the battleship TFS Inevitable Retribution. You are in direct violation of the Sanctuary Protocol for refugee species. Cease your pursuit immediately or face the consequences. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, breaking the paralysis, the Imperial response came, arrogant and dismissive. Unidentified vessel, you have no authority here. The Terrans are extinct. This is a pathetic charade. Move aside or be destroyed along with the rest. Captain Volkov responded, and Taylor could hear the dangerous smile in her voice. Extinct? Is that what you tell yourselves to sleep at night? A calculated pause. Very well. Allow me to reintroduce you to reality. All Imperial units have 5 seconds to retreat, or they will be considered hostile. Your time starts now. The countdown echoed through space. 5, 4, 3. The Imperial ships surged forward, opening fire. 2, 1. What happened next redefined everything Taylor thought she knew about space warfare. The battleship Inevitable Retribution didn't move. It didn't need to. From the belly of the Terran ship, hidden launches revealed themselves in a coordinated sequence. There was no fanfare, no visual warning other than brief blue flashes that tore through space like trapped lightning. Taylor watched, paralyzed, as the physics she knew simply stopped making sense. The projectiles didn't follow predictable ballistic trajectories. They moved in impossible vectors, curving through space as if gravity itself were guiding them. The first salvo hit 3 Imperial ships simultaneously, impacting not the outer shields, but passing through them as if they were illusions. The explosions that followed weren't the familiar orange glow of antimatter detonations. They were silent, terrifying structural collapses. The central sections of the Imperial ships simply imploded, compressing into singular points before dispersing into clouds of superheated debris. "Report!" Taylor demanded, her voice cracking for the first time in weeks. The sensor officer's hands were shaking over the console. "Commander, I don't know what I just witnessed. The Terran projectiles seem to operate on principles of localized gravity. They create microscopic gravity wells that collapse the molecular structure of the targets from the inside. Conventional shields offer no protection because they weren't designed to block distortions in the fabric of space itself." Miller looked at Taylor, his shoulders tensed in primal alarm. That should be theoretically impossible. The energy required to manipulate gravity that way would exceed the output of a main sequence star. But there it was, happening right before their eyes. The Imperial fleet, so confident seconds ago, broke formation in disorganized panic. The 15 remaining ships scattered in erratic vectors, their trajectories leaving trails of wasted propellant as they tried to escape the kill zone. Captain Volkov's voice echoed again, calm and relentless. Fleeing targets marked, executing retreat, denial protocol. The Terran battleship finally moved, and the movement defied all known laws of propulsion. There was no gradual acceleration, no visible energy buildup in the thrusters. The ship simply shifted instantly 3 kilometers to the left, then 5 up, occupying positions that cut off the Imperial escape routes with surgical precision. "How?" Taylor whispered. "Hyperspace micro-jumps in combat are suicidal. The gravitational decompression would kill the crew." But the Terrans had clearly solved problems the rest of the galaxy considered fundamentally insolvable. The Imperial ships opened fire desperately. Plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, bursts of accelerated protons, everything was hurled at the Terran battleship in a storm of destruction that would have vaporized an entire fleet. and it did absolutely nothing. A force field unlike anything Taylor had ever studied enveloped the retribution. It was visible only by the ripples it created in space, like heat, distorting the air. The impacts of the Imperial weapons met that barrier and simply ceased to exist, their energy dispersed into harmless spectrums of light. "Commander." The sensor officer was reading data she clearly didn't believe was real. The Terran shields are operating on a rotating frequency of 4,600 cycles per second. They aren't absorbing the energy of the attacks, they're redirecting it into parallel dimensions. It's warp technology applied defensively. Taylor felt her understanding of reality shatter and reorganize. Everything she had learned about space combat, all the strategies and tactics she had mastered, became obsolete in a matter of minutes. The inevitable retribution responded with calculated fire. There was no waste, no dramatic excess. Every shot was precise, every target eliminated with clinical efficiency. 4 more Imperial ships collapsed in on themselves. 3 had their reactors disabled by electromagnetic pulses that passed through their armor like ghosts. 2 were simply sliced in half by concentrated beams of gravity that tore through their molecular structures in 7 minutes. And 42 seconds, 18 warships of the hegemonic empire, the most feared military force in the galaxy, were reduced to drifting wreckage or inert hulls, floating powerless in the vacuum. 0 Terran casualties. The silence that descended on the bridge of the Aurora's spear was the silence of minds trying to process the impossible. It was Miller who finally broke the trance. "Commander, receiving a communication signal from the Terran ship. Narrow band, directed specifically to us." Taylor had to clear her throat twice before she could speak. "Open the channel." The holographic image that materialized showed a human woman of approximately 40 Earth years, dark hair pulled back in a functional bun, eyes of a stormy gray that had clearly witnessed horrors and learned to return them twofold. Her uniform was matte black, with silver accents, adorned with insignia Taylor didn't recognize. "Commander Taylor," Captain Elena Volkov said, her voice carrying an accent the linguistic archives identified as Eastern Slavic, from the region of ancient Earth. "I apologize for the abrupt intervention. My name is Elena Volkov, and I represent the Terran Defense Fleet. We intercepted your final transmission approximately 19 minutes ago." Taylor found her voice, though it sounded strange to her own ears. "Captain Volkov, I don't understand. Galactic records state categorically that humanity went extinct 300 cycles ago. How are you here? How do you possess this technology?" Elena allowed a small, sad smile. "The galactic records are both correct and terribly wrong, Commander. Humanity did indeed face extinction, but not in the way the galaxy believes. We have much to discuss, but first, your civilians need immediate assistance. I'm detecting critical failures in your life support systems." Before Taylor could respond, the space around the convoy began to ripple. 3 additional ships emerged from the nebula, smaller than the battleship, but still impressive. They were engineering transports, their silhouettes covered in repair and docking equipment. "My relief ships," Elena explained. "With your permission, Commander, we would like to stabilize your critical systems and provide medical and food supplies. No strings attached, no cost. Just help." Taylor looked at Miller, who nodded slowly. What choice did they have? "Permission granted, Captain, and thank you. We don't have words to express our gratitude." The words will come later, Eleanor said. For now, let's just make sure everyone survives to share them. Volkov, out. In the following hours, Taylor witnessed efficiency that bordered on the miraculous. Terran engineering teams worked with equipment that seemed to read the failures of the Volana's systems even before the operators themselves detected them. Reactors, on the brink of collapse, were stabilized. Life support generators received replacement components that adapted perfectly despite being of completely different origin. And most impressively, the Terrans worked with a kindness Taylor hadn't expected from such a devastatingly lethal military force. They spoke with the Volani's refugees, offering words of comfort in their own language, which they had clearly studied during the approach. 6 hours after the first contact, Taylor received a formal invitation to visit the inevitable retribution. She accepted, taking Miller as her senior officer. The transport ship that picked them up was a masterpiece of compact engineering. The interior was austere, but every surface had a purpose. No superfluous decoration, just functional design taken to perfection. Docking with the battleship revealed the true scale of the construction. The inevitable retribution was larger than some asteroids Taylor had seen. Corridors stretched in every direction, bustling with human crew, moving with military purpose, but without the inhuman rigidity that characterized Imperial forces. Elena was waiting for them in the main antechamber, accompanied by 2 officers, a man with dark skin and features the archives identified as sub-Saharan African, and an Asian woman whose eyes bore the unmistakable mark of generations living in low gravity. Commander Taylor, Lieutenant Miller, welcome aboard, Eleanor said, gesturing for them to follow. I'd like to take you to the command center where we can talk properly. But first, I assume you have urgent questions. Just one that summarizes all the others, Taylor said as they walked through corridors pulsing with contained energy. How? How did you survive? How did you develop this technology? And why now? Why appear after 3 centuries? Eleanor stopped in front of a large viewport. Outside, the Charon Nebula stretched out in all its dangerous and beautiful glory. 317 years ago, Elena began, her voice taking on the tone of a historical account, humanity faced what we call the Ages of Fire. It wasn't a single war, but a cascade of conflicts that consumed our home system. Earth, Mars, the moons of Jupiter, the colonies of Saturn, all were laid waste in less than a decade. She turned to face Taylor directly. We cried out for help. We begged the great galactic powers, the confederations, the collectives. We offered everything: resources, knowledge, service, if necessary. The response was silence. Absolute, cowardly, calculated silence. Taylor felt a tightening in her chest as she recognized her own recent despair reflected in Elena's words. Of the 8 billion humans who called the Sol system home, only 200,000 escaped. They fled in makeshift generation ships, seeking refuge anywhere that would take them. No one did. They were hunted, exploited, enslaved. The galaxy decided that humanity was a convenient nuisance to ignore. Eleanor took a deep breath, and Taylor saw ancient anger burning in those grey eyes. But 60,000 reached this nebula. They found caves in resource-rich asteroids hidden by the radiation. And there, in the depths of galactic oblivion, they made a decision. They wouldn't die in silence. They wouldn't beg again. They would build. They would learn. They would evolve. The captain gestured to the battleship around them. 3 centuries, Commander. 3 centuries of hidden growth, of secret shipyards and hidden colonies, of scientific experiments that pushed the boundaries of what the galaxy considered possible. We became what we needed to be to ensure no human ever had to beg for their life again. She paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. And then 2 weeks ago, we detected something. A transmission crossing the galaxy, 17 distress calls, all ignored. An entire civilization being exterminated while the universe watched with indifference. Elena placed a hand on Taylor's shoulder, a gesture of deep solidarity. We decided never again would we allow the cries of the innocent to be swallowed by the void. Never again would we stand by while terror walks unopposed. The galaxy taught us that compassion is weakness. Very well. We're going to demonstrate just how dangerous that weakness can be. Taylor felt tears sting her eyes, something she hadn't allowed herself in weeks. You came for us. You risked exposure. You risked war for strangers. Not strangers, Elena corrected softly. Survivors, like us. And survivors look out for each other, or the universe wins. Miller, who had remained in respectful silence, finally spoke. Captain Volkov, the Empire won't accept this intervention. They'll come with everything they have. Elena smiled, and there was steel in that smile. Let them come. We've been waiting for this conversation for a long time. The command center of the inevitable retribution was unlike any ship bridge Taylor had ever seen. There were no chaotic individual stations or panels flashing in alarming colors. Instead, a wide circular space, lit by soft blue light, contained floating three-dimensional holograms that mapped not just local space, but entire layers of tactical, logistical, and strategic data. Human officers worked in silent synchrony, their interactions with the system so fluid they seemed like natural extensions of their thoughts. Taylor noticed discrete neural interfaces at their temples, technology most galactic civilizations had abandoned due to the risks of brain feedback. Fourth-generation neural interfaces, Elena explained, following Taylor's gaze. Perfected over 200 years of iteration. None of the latency or cognitive degradation issues the old versions had. It allows our crew to operate with efficiency bordering on telepathy. The Asian officer accompanying them, introduced as Commander Sarah Chen, the battleship's executive officer, activated the central display. The Charon Nebula materialized in stunning detail, its ionized gas clouds mapped in molecular resolution. Commander Taylor, what I'm about to show you is classified as absolute secret by the Terran fleet, Elena said, her voice turning formal. I'm sharing this because you deserve to understand the situation you're truly in, and because I believe your species can become a valuable ally in what's to come. Elena gestured, and the map expanded. Suddenly, what Taylor had thought was an empty nebula revealed itself to be a massive complex of hidden structures. Space stations nestled in low-radiation pockets. Shipyards built inside hollowed-out asteroids. Hydroponic farms stretching for miles, fed by the filtered light of distant stars. Research facilities, antimatter factories, fusion reactors the size of small moons, and ships, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. This is Charon's refuge, Elena announced, our secret home for 300 years. Current population, 7,400,000 humans, plus about 300,000 non-humans who found their way to us over the decades. Miller made a sound that was half admiration, half terror. 7 million? But galactic records claim only a few hundred humans survived, and those were assimilated or died without descendants. The galactic records, Sarah Chen said with a dry smile, were carefully fed misinformation over the centuries. It wasn't hard. The universe wanted to believe we were extinct, so we provided evidence that confirmed that comfortable belief. Elena stepped closer to the hologram, her fingers sliding through layers of data. We started with almost nothing. Generation ships that could barely maintain life support. But we brought something no amount of technology can replace: human knowledge. Scientists, engineers, artists, philosophers, every refugee carried entire libraries in their memory implants. She tapped an icon, and new displays emerged, showing timelines of technological development. In the first 50 years, we just survived. Synthetic food of questionable quality, recycled air that smelled like metal, children born in inconsistent, artificial gravity. But we survived, and we studied. Sarah took over the narrative. Years 50 to 100, we established the first sustainable industries. Asteroid mining, refineries for exotic materials found in the nebula. We discovered that Charon's radiation, while deadly in long exposure, could be harnessed for unique energy processes. Eleanor continued, and Taylor realized they were telling a rehearsed story, a story that clearly meant everything to them. Years 100 to 200, the scientific revolution. Without the political and bureaucratic restrictions that stifled research in the civilized galaxy, our best thinkers could experiment freely. Applied gravitational theory, microscopic wormhole manipulation, dimensional force fields. Concepts the galactic scientific community ridiculed as impossible. Sarah smiled with fierce pride. It turns out, impossible just means no one else had the desperate need to make it possible. When your species faces extinction, you question every assumption, you challenge every limit. And the last 117 years? Taylor asked, completely absorbed. Mass industrialization, Eleanor replied. We turned every asteroid in the nebula into a resource. We built shipyards that operate 24 hours a cycle, 7 cycles a week, 365 days a Terran year. Every human adult in Charon dedicates 10 hours a week to the production effort, whether in factories, farms, or research. She zoomed in on the section showing the war fleet. The inevitable retribution is one of 47 Vengeance-class battleships. We have 120 battle cruisers, 400 destroyers, and over 2,000 support ships. Each one equipped with technology the galaxy would take centuries to understand, let alone replicate. Miller was processing numbers on his handheld device. His shoulders tensed. Captain Volkov, forgive my bluntness, but those numbers are impossible. A population of 7 million couldn't crew and maintain a fleet that size. You'd need at least 20 million personnel just for basics operations. Sarah nodded, appreciating the sharp observation. Correct, Lieutenant Miller. That's why 80% of our fleet operates under advanced artificial intelligence control. Our AIs aren't sentient in the traditional sense. They're more like digital extensions of human will. Each human captain commands a fleet of 5 to 10 AI-operated ships that respond with millisecond precision. Taylor felt a chill. You managed to solve the command latency problem? All galactic attempts to implement large-scale military AIs failed because of communication delays during high-speed combat. Quantum entanglement, Elena said simply, instant communication, regardless of distance. It took 140 years to perfect, but it was worth every second of research. The display changed again, this time showing images of civilian habitats inside the nebula. Taylor saw entire cities built in giant domes, parks where human children played under artificial skies that perfectly mimicked the blue of ancient Earth. Schools, hospitals, cultural centers. "We aren't just a military machine," Eleanor explained softly. "We are a complete civilization. We have poets and musicians, scientists and teachers, farmers and artisans. We preserved the best of humanity while preparing for the worst." She touched another control, and the display showed a memorial, a black wall where millions of names were engraved in tiny silver letters. "These are the 8 billion we lost during the Ages of Fire. Every child born in Charon visits this memorial at age 12 and chooses a name to study. They learn that person's history, their dreams, their contributions. It's our way of ensuring the dead are never forgotten." Taylor stepped closer to the holographic memorial, reading names in ancient Earth languages: English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Swahili, dozens of others. Each one represented an extinguished life, a stolen future. "You carry your dead with you," she whispered. "As we are beginning to do. And that's why we understand your pain," Eleanor said. "That's why we answered your call when the rest of the galaxy chose silence." A discreet alert sounded on the bridge. The communications officer, a woman with Indian features, turned around. "Captain, we've detected a high-power hyperspace transmission originating from the Imperial core. The pattern matches a fleet summons. They're calling for reinforcements." Elena nodded, as if she had expected exactly that. "Estimated time for reinforcement arrival?" "Based on known distance from major Imperial garrisons and the jump capacity of their capital ships, between 18 and 22 hours. Estimated size of the response force?" The officer consulted her data. "Impossible to determine precisely, but based on standard Imperial protocols for the loss of an entire flotilla, we expect at least a full armada. 200 to 300 warships, including at least 3 Hegemon-class command ships." The silence that followed was heavy. Taylor did the math quickly. Even with superior Terran technology, those numbers were overwhelming. "Captain," Taylor said slowly, "you've done more than we ever imagined possible by saving my people. But now you face a total war with the Empire. Perhaps it's better if you withdraw, take my refugees somewhere safe inside the nebula. You don't need to risk your entire civilization for us." Elena looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise and respect. "Commander Taylor, I appreciate your concern, but you don't understand. We didn't save you out of charity, though compassion is certainly part of it. We saved you because this is exactly what we hope the universe will become, a place where the suffering of the innocent is not tolerated, where tyrannies cannot operate without consequences." Sarah Chen stepped forward, her military posture relaxing slightly. "Besides, this confrontation has been coming for a long time. The hegemonic empire represents everything we despise: systematic oppression, casual genocide, the belief that might makes right. They've ruled this galaxy for too long without real opposition. And now," Elena continued, "we have the opportunity and the moral obligation to demonstrate that their reign of terror has an expiration date." She zoomed out on the star map, showing hyperspace travel routes converging on Charon's current location. "We've already sent transmissions to the hidden enclaves we've established over the years. Other human colonies smaller than Karen but equally advanced. They are mobilizing their fleets. Within 20 hours, we will have a force equivalent to the Imperial Armada heading our way. Miller seemed to be having trouble processing the scale of the revelation. How many of you are there, really? At last count, Sarah said, with a small smile. Approximately 23 million humans distributed across 7 main enclaves and dozens of smaller stations. We keep our population below the levels that could be detected by long-range galactic scans, quality over quantity. Elena turned to Taylor with a serious expression. But there's something more important than military force. Commander, your final transmission, that message condemning galactic cowardice, is echoing through hundreds of systems, and it's having an effect you might not have anticipated. Another display activated, showing communication intercepts from dozens of different worlds. Species living under Imperial rule or under the constant threat of invasion heard your words. They saw images of our intervention, and they're starting to ask dangerous questions. If the supposedly extinct humans can defy the Empire, why can't they? Taylor saw transmissions from worlds she recognized from galactic maps, coded messages from underground resistances, discreet requests for contact, offers of alliance. You lit a spark, Eleanor said. In 20 hours, when the Imperial Armada arrives, they won't just be facing humanity. They'll be facing something much more dangerous. Hope. And hope, Commander Taylor, is the most destructive force in the universe when directed against tyranny. Taylor looked at the faces around her, humans who had survived the impossible, who had turned exile into rebirth, who now offered to others what had been denied to them so many generations ago. "What do you need from us?" she asked simply. Eleanor smiled, a genuine and warm expression. "First, we want your people to rest. Human doctors are already aboard your ships, treating the wounded, providing proper nutrition. Your engineers too, stabilizing systems beyond emergency repair." She paused. "Second, when the battle begins, we need your patrol ships to serve as communication coordinators. Not as frontline combatants, you've suffered enough, but as a bridge between our fleet and any allies that might appear. Your species has a reputation for skillful diplomacy. Use that skill." Taylor nodded slowly. "And third?" "Third," Eleanor said, and her voice carried the weight of a solemn promise. "When this is over, when the Empire is broken and the galaxy needs to rebuild, we will need voices like yours. Voices that know both the horrors of war and the value of peace. Voices that can help build something better than what came before." She extended her hand, an ancient human gesture of agreement and trust. "Commander Taylor of the Valanis people, are you willing to stand with us, not as subordinates, but as equals united by a common purpose?" Taylor looked at the extended hand, then at Miller, who nodded with conviction. She thought of her people, the 40,000 who had survived when billions perished. She thought of the names engraved on the human memorial, reflections of the names she herself carried in her memory. She took Elena's hand, feeling the warmth of life in her grip. "Captain Elena Volkov," Taylor said, her voice firm and clear, "it would be our honor to fight alongside humanity, not just in this battle, but in all those to come. You reminded us of something we almost forgot in the darkness, that it's worth fighting not just for survival, but for a universe that deserves to be lived in." Eleanor squeezed her hand firmly, then let it begin. "In 20 hours, we rewrite the rules of this galaxy. The next 18 hours transformed the Charon Nebula into a cauldron of coordinated activity. Taylor watched from the command center of the inevitable retribution as the machinery of human preparation unfolded with precision that defied description. Ships emerged from the nebula depths in timed sequences, not in chaotic groups, but in perfectly calculated formations that maximized space efficiency and minimized gravitational interference. Each ship took its position as if following an invisible choreography rehearsed 1,000 times. Elena had assigned Taylor and Miller a dedicated observation station equipped with real-time translators and access to communication feeds covering an impressive spectrum of frequencies. It was a demonstration of trust that did not go unnoticed. Incoming contact, Sector 73 Delta, the sensor officer announced. ID confirmed. Enclave Novgorod reporting successful insertion. 23 warships, 47 support vessels. Eleanor checked the tactical display. Welcome, Novgorod. Take position, Delta 3, and sync your weapons systems with the main tactical network. The response came in heavily accented Russian, instantly translated by the system. Confirmed. Retribution. It's good to be back in the fight, Captain Volkov. Minutes later, another transmission arrived. New Kilimanjaro Enclave dropping out of hyperspace. 18 warships, 30 support vessels. All systems operating within optimal parameters. Theta Var watched as the tactical map filled with icons representing a growing military force. But it wasn't just humans answering the call. Captain, the communications officer said, her voice carrying a carefully controlled note of surprise. Receiving a non-human transmission. Wideband, standard galactic trade protocol. Elena raised an eyebrow. Put it on audio. The voice that emerged was from a universal translator, masking the nuances of the original language, but the determination came through clearly. Attention, human forces. This is Merchant Captain Vexnor of the Free Transport Guild. We are not warriors, but we carry supplies and long memories. 70 cycles ago, my ancestor sent out a distress call when Imperial pirates destroyed our trade fleet. The galaxy did not answer. You appeared, without even knowing us, and escorted our survivors to safety. There was an emotional pause. We have 16 freighters, converted with the best weapons we could buy or rig up. They aren't much, but they are ours. And we offer them freely to this cause. Elena looked at Sarah Chen, who gave a slight nod. Merchant Captain Vexnor, your offer is accepted with gratitude. But we will not put civilians on the front line. Your ships will serve as logistics support, medical evacuation, and communications coordination. Is that acceptable? More than acceptable, human captain. Where do you want us? As Sarah directed the merchants to support positions, more contacts began to appear. One by one, in small but determined groups, ships from dozens of different species emerged from hyperspace. A flotilla of asteroid miners from Rigel, whose worlds had been taxed into poverty by the Empire. 3 patrol ships from the Deneb system, survivors of a rebellion crushed 20 years ago. A single heavy cruiser from the Kalos Resistance, operated by a crew that had lost 3 generations fighting Imperial oppression. Each new arrival brought a story of ignored suffering, of cries for help that had echoed without an answer. And each one also brought a determination forged in decades or centuries of silent resistance. Theta Var realized she was witnessing something greater than military preparation. It was a physical manifestation of an underground network of shared pain and suppressed hope that had always existed beneath the surface of the seemingly stable galactic order. "How many will come?" she asked Elena, who was studying the tactical map with a thoughtful expression. "Impossible to predict with certainty," Elena replied. "We only sent the summons to verified contacts, species we knew had reason to hate the Empire and the capacity to arrive in time. But the message seems to have spread further than expected. Krevtin was analyzing the composition of the forming fleet. Captain Volkov, with all due respect, most of these non-human ships are equipped with standard galactic weaponry. Against Imperial ships of the line, their life expectancy will be measured in minutes." "True," Eleanor agreed. "That is why they won't fight that way." She zoomed in on a section of tactical space, revealing a complex formation that looked more like art than military strategy. Our capital ships form the front line, soaking up heavy fire and creating suppression fields that will neutralize the Imperial range advantage. The Allied ships operate in secondary layers, providing concentrated support fire on targets that have already been weakened. We use superior Terran technology to create opportunities, and we use the Allied numbers to exploit them. Sarah Chen added more details. Additionally, we've modified 200 combat drones with dimensional transfer shields. Each Allied ship will receive 4 drones that will create protective bubbles around them. It's not invincibility, but it will turn minutes of life expectancy into hours. Thetavar studied the formation with the eyes of an experienced commander. It was bold, complex, and required synchronization that bordered on the impossible. But if anyone could execute the impossible, it was clearly the humans. "Comms station for Commander Thetavar," a voice sounded on her personal console. Thetavar activated the link and found herself looking at the face of a Velanis child, no more than 8 cycles old, on one of the civilianish ships in the convoy. "Commander," the child said in a formal voice that betrayed careful training in military etiquette, "Mommy asked me to thank the humans. Their doctor fixed my little brother. He was very sick, but now he's breathing right again." Thetavar felt a tightening in her chest. "Convey my gratitude to the human doctor, little one, and take good care of your brother." "Yes, Commander." "And Commander, the humans are kind. It's not like the adults said aliens would be." Before Thetavar could respond, the transmission ended, leaving her with uncomfortable thoughts about prejudices she hadn't even realized she carried. Elena had observed the exchange. "Your refugees are recovering well. Our doctors report that most critical cases have been stabilized. The children especially are responding well to treatment. Why do you do this?" Thetavar asked suddenly. "I understand the military motivation, the long-term strategy, but the individual care, the kindness toward every refugee, that goes beyond pragmatism." Elena was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. During the Ages of Fire, when everything was falling apart, there was a specific moment that defined who we would become. An evacuation ship called the Golden Hope was damaged, reactors failing, life support with only minutes of reserve. There was space on other ships to take maybe half of the refugees. She took a deep breath. The captain of that ship, a man named James Morrison, had an impossible choice. He could try to save some and condemn the rest, or he could use the last minutes of power to transmit rendezvous coordinates to other refugee ships, knowing that meant everyone on board would die. Thetavar already knew the end of the story before Eleanor finished it. Morrison chose the transmission. 800 souls aboard the Golden Hope perished, but 4,000 on other ships survived because they received those coordinates. Morrison could have easily saved himself. There were enough escape pods for the officers. He stayed on the bridge until the end, ensuring the message transmitted clearly. Elena looked directly at Thetavar. Those 4,000 people had children, who had children, who had more children. It's estimated that 73% of humans alive today are direct descendants of those Morrison saved. So, Commander Thetavar, we don't do these things for strategy. We do them because James Morrison, and hundreds like him, taught us that the measure of a civilization isn't military power or advanced technology. It's what you are willing to sacrifice for strangers you will never meet. Before Thetavar could respond, alerts blared across the bridge. Massive hyperspace contact. The sensors officer announced, her voice tense, multiple signatures emerging simultaneously. Distance, 2 astronomical units, and closing. The tactical map exploded with red icons. Not 200 ships as estimated, not 300. 517 Imperial warships materialized in normal space in a formation that covered an area equivalent to a small moon. In the center were 3 monstrosities that made even the inevitable retribution look small. Hegemon-class command ships, each capable of vitrifying entire continents. Final count? Confirmed, the officer reported, maintaining a professional voice against overwhelming odds. 517 Imperial combatants, including 3 Hegemon super dreadnoughts, 80 Dominion-class, heavy cruisers, and 434 assorted ships of the line. Sarah Chen quickly checked her own forces, our forces, 147 Terran warships, 208 allies of varying capability. Ratio is approximately 3.3 to 1 against us. Crevton made a sound that in his species indicated controlled despair. That is a full planetary invasion force. They didn't just come for revenge, they came to completely exterminate any trace of resistance. Receiving a transmission from the Central Imperial Command Ship, communications announced. Wide spectrum, all bands. They want everyone to hear. Put it on, Elena ordered, her voice as calm as ancient stone. The image that materialized was of a vaguely humanoid creature, but where humans had smooth skin. This being displayed chitinous plates of metallic gray. Its eyes were multiple compounds, glowing with cold, calculated intelligence. The uniform carried so many command insignias that it practically shimmered. Attention, insurgent forces, the voice was processed through multiple vocal chambers, creating a discordant harmonic that caused physical discomfort. I am Lord Admiral Crixthor, Supreme Commander of the 3rd Imperial Armada. You have committed an act of war against the hegemonic empire by destroying Imperial military units legally engaged in a security operation. Elena did not respond immediately, merely observing with a neutral expression. Crixthor continued, clearly accustomed to uninterrupted monologues. The unknown ship, identifying as Terran, will have one opportunity, and only one, to surrender unconditionally. Your occupants will be processed according to Imperial law. Resistance will result in total annihilation. A dramatic pause. As for the Valanis refugees, their fate has already been sealed by their own Council of Elders, who approved Imperial expansion into neutral territory without proper consultation. They will be executed as an example. As for you, supposedly extinct humans who have emerged like pathetic ghosts, You will be crushed and used as a demonstration of what happens to those who challenge the established order. Elena finally spoke, her voice cutting through the imperial arrogance like a laser through fog. Lord Admiral Crixthor, let me clarify a few facts. First, humanity is not extinct, as you can clearly observe. Second, the Valanis refugees are under our protection and will not be handed over. Third, this nebula and all space within 100 light-years is now declared a Terran sanctuary zone. Any violation will be met with appropriate force. Crixthor produced a sound. The translator interpreted as a disdainful laugh. Sanctuary zone? You are, at most, a few thousand pathetic survivors with perhaps a dozen ships. I have brought enough force to vitrify planets. What possible chance do you think you have? Elena smiled, and it was the smile of a predator that had finally stopped pretending to be prey. Lord Admiral, you have made a fundamental error. You believed your own propaganda. You believed that brute force equals guaranteed victory. You believed that a stagnant technology of millennia is enough against innovation born of desperate necessity. She gestured, and every Imperial sensor surely detected what happened next. From the depths of the Charon Nebula, more ships emerged, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands of combat drones, each the size of a patrol ship, each operated by an artificial intelligence connected in a neural network that functioned as a single distributed brain. And behind them, moving out of hidden positions in asteroids and gas pockets, 23 more Terran battleships revealed themselves, their hulls glowing with contained energy. Updated count of Terran forces, Elena said calmly. 70 human-crewed capital ships, 2,416 autonomous combat drones, and approximately 500 AI-guided antimatter missiles. Currently inside your shield perimeter, awaiting activation commands. A shocked silence emanated from the Imperial transmission. So, Lord Admiral Crixthor, I am going to make a counteroffer. You have one opportunity, and only one, to withdraw your forces peacefully. Return to your masters and inform them that this galaxy has changed. The era of unopposed tyranny is over. A new era has begun, where the innocent have defenders, where refugees find sanctuary, and where empires learn that there are consequences for their cruelties. Elena leaned toward the camera. Or stay and find out why humanity was not extinct. We discovered that when you take everything from a species, when you force them to evolve or die, they become something the universe has never seen before. Something dangerous. Something relentless. Something that remembers its pain and resolves that no one else will ever feel the same. She straightened up. Your answer, Lord Admiral? Peace or war? Choose wisely. This will be the most important decision of your life. The 23 seconds of silence that followed Eleanor's ultimatum felt like they lasted geological eras. Thetavar watched the tactical map, seeing thousands of icons representing military power, concentrated enough to reshape entire galaxies, all waiting for a single word that would determine if history would be written in diplomacy or in fire. Lord Admiral Crixthor's response came not in words, but in action. The weapon banks of the Imperial ships lit up simultaneously, building energy in displays that turned the vacuum into a canvas of luminous threat. Detecting energy spikes in all Imperial ships, the sensors officer reported. Weapons charging for maximum discharge. Time to effective range, 40 seconds. Elena showed no surprise or disappointment. She simply nodded slightly, as if confirming a calculation she had already made. Very well. she said calmly. "Sarah, activate Aegis. Protocol, all units, combat positions Delta 7, drone coordination to Level 3 autonomous control." "Aegis protocol activated," Sarah confirmed, her fingers dancing over holographic controls. "Distributive neural network online. All weapon systems synchronized. Dimensional shields at maximum capacity." Theta Var watched as the Terran fleet transformed from a waiting formation into a war machine in fluid motion that looked rehearsed 1,000 times. The battleships took up positions in overlapping layers, creating an interlaced field of fire where each ship covered the vulnerabilities of the others. The combat drones dispersed in a pattern that seemed chaotic, until Theta Var realized the underlying geometry. They formed a complex three-dimensional grid, each node positioned to maximize sensory coverage and minimize exposure to concentrated fire. 20 seconds to Imperial range, the sensors officer counted down. Krevtin had taken an auxiliary station monitoring Allied communications. "Commander Theta Var, our patrol ships are in position. All Allied captains confirm readiness, though several express understandable concern about the odds. Transmit to them to maintain fire discipline and follow exactly the coordinates provided by the Terran battle controllers," Theta Var instructed, "and remind them that we have witnessed the humans turn the impossible into a routine. Faith is worth as much as firepower right now." 10 seconds. Elena touched a control at her station, opening a wide-spectrum communication channel that would reach every ship on the battlefield, human, Allied, or Imperial. "Attention, all forces. Today, we write a new chapter in galactic history. For too long, tyranny has operated without consequences, genocide has proceeded without opposition, and the cries of the innocent have echoed in the void without an answer. Today, that ends. We do not fight for conquest or revenge. We fight so the universe knows there is a line that cannot be crossed without a cost. That there are people who will say, 'No more,' and make those words stick. All units, you may open fire when ready. Imperial range in 3, 2, 1. Space exploded in light. 500 Imperial ships fired simultaneously, releasing energy equivalent to the output of a main sequence star for an entire hour. All concentrated into a volume of space smaller than a planet. Plasma cannons created rivers of superheated fire. Antimatter torpedoes traced contrails of annihilation. Bursts of accelerated protons pierced the vacuum at frequencies that would make atoms vibrate until disintegration. It was a storm of destruction that could vitrify continents, vaporize oceans, and shatter worlds. And it met the Terran dimensional shields. Theta Var had seen demonstrations of Terran shield technology, but seeing it on a full battle scale was a completely different experience. The shields did not glow or shimmer like conventional energy barriers. Instead, they created distortions in space itself, pockets where physical laws bent slightly to the side. The Imperial weapons hit those distortions and simply vanished, their energy redirected into parallel dimensions where matter and energy did not interact with the normal universe. There were no dramatic explosions, no energy feedback, just a silent and absolute cessation of the threat. Dimensional shields operating at 97% efficiency, Sarah reported, energy dispersion within predicted parameters. We can maintain this level indefinitely. The Terran response was surgical in its precision. The 70 battleships did not fire massive salvos as the Imperials had. Instead, each ship selected specific targets, calculated attack vectors, that took into account not just current positions, but where the targets would be in the next 3 to 5 seconds, and released weaponry that operated on principles that mainstream galactic science considered impossible. Localized gravity projectiles, the same weapon that had destroyed the first Imperial flotilla, crossed space in curved trajectories. They ignored Imperial interception attempts because they did not travel through normal space, but through microscopic shortcuts in the spatial fabric itself. The first Imperial cruiser hit simply collapsed, its central section compressed into a singular point, creating a microscopic black hole that existed for nanoseconds before evaporating in a burst of Hawking radiation. The residual effect tore the ship into 2 perfectly symmetrical halves. 3 seconds later, 15 additional Imperial ships suffered a similar fate. Priority targets identified and engaged, Sarah reported, focusing on command ships and coordination field generators. Once we break their ability to operate as a unified fleet, they become individual targets. The Terran combat drones entered the fray with a tactic Thetavar had never encountered. They did not attack the Imperial ships directly, but created interference fields that destabilized the Imperial targeting systems. Missiles that should have traveled in a straight line suddenly veered off at erratic angles. Energy bursts lost coherence and dispersed harmlessly. It was psychological warfare implemented through advanced physics. The Imperial crews saw their weapons fail, not because of damage, but because of principles they didn't understand, creating the doubt and confusion that are as deadly in combat as any physical weapon. Krixthor apparently realized he was losing control of the battle. His voice exploded through the comms, overflowing with fury. All units, formation, Delta 9. Concentrate fire on the Terran command ships. Ignore the drones, focus on the high-value targets. It was a reasonable tactic. If he could decapitate the Terran command structure, the perfect coordination would collapse. But Elena had anticipated exactly that response. Sarah, activate the distributed command network. Transfer control to the secondary AI matrix. Distributed network active, Sarah confirmed. Even if we lose half of our capital ships, battle coordination remains intact. The Imperial ships executed a concentration maneuver, their formations compressing to create a deadly zone of convergent fire. It was a move that would have worked against any conventional opponent. The Terrans simply teleported. It wasn't the micro-hyperspace jump Thetavar had witnessed before. It was something subtler, more controlled. The battleships shifted in complex patterns, appearing and disappearing in microsecond intervals, never staying in a single position long enough for concentrated Imperial fire to take effect. How do they do that? Krevtin whispered, watching the tactical map that showed Terran battleships occupying multiple positions almost simultaneously. The calculations required to avoid collisions during such rapid teleportation should exceed the capacity of any known computer. Entangled quantum computing, Thetavar replied, remembering Elena's explanations. They don't calculate all possibilities sequentially. They calculate them all simultaneously and select the best one. While the battleships dance their impossible ballet, the non-human allies found their role. With dimensional transfer shields provided by the Terrans protecting them from the worst of the Imperial fire, they directed conventional weaponry against targets the Terrans had already weakened. A mining ship from Rigel, its asteroid drilling cannons modified for combat, found an Imperial cruiser whose shields had been destabilized by a Terran gravity pulse. The drilling beam, designed to cut through solid rock, tore through the compromised hull like a knife through fabric. 3 patrol ships from Deneb worked in coordination to surround an isolated Imperial destroyer. Their short-range torpedoes finding vulnerable armor joints that Terran targeting data identified with surgical precision. It was a perfect symbiosis of superior technology and desperate determination, each side compensating for the other's weaknesses. 10 minutes after the start of the battle, 83 Imperial ships had been destroyed or disabled. Terran losses totaled 2 combat drones and superficial damage to 4 battleships. Allied losses were more severe. 17 ships lost, but significantly lower than what would be expected in a conventional confrontation. Crixthor finally realized the terrible truth. He was losing. All ships, retreat to rear guard formation, he ordered, his voice carrying an edge of panic that Imperial commanders were trained never to show. Activate emergency protocols. Delta Maximum. What happened next made Thetavar truly understand Imperial cruelty. The 3 hegemon super dreadnoughts, which had remained in reserve during the initial exchange, activated systems that Thetavar recognized from intelligence reports with growing horror. "Captain Volkov," she shouted, "they are charging planetary rupture cannons. Those weapons were designed to destroy entire worlds." Elena checked her sensors, her face becoming a mask of controlled fury. "Confirmed. Enough energy to vitrify an M-class planet is being accumulated in each hegemon. Time to full charge. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Sarah looked at her with urgency. "If they fire those in this confined space, the entire nebula will become a deadly radiation zone. Our enclaves, millions of civilians, everything will be exposed." Crixthor transmitted again, his voice regaining a desperate arrogance. "Attention, Terran forces. My hegemon ships are armed with the capacity to make this entire sector uninhabitable for 1,000 generations. Surrender immediately or everyone dies. Humans, allies, refugees, everyone." It was a hollow bluff. Firing those weapons would mean destroying his own fleet as well. But it was a bluff that might work if Elena valued the lives of Terran civilians above all else. Thetavar saw Elena make the decision in real time. She saw the moment the human captain chose between the safety of her people and the principles they fought for. "Negative, Crixthor. Our surrender offers have expired. Sarah, activate Phoenix Protocol." Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Elena, Phoenix Protocol has never been tested on a real battle scale. The risks are calculated and acceptable. Execute." Sarah took a deep breath and entered a sequence of commands that transformed the battlefield once again. Of the 70 Terran battleships, 20 detached from the main formation. Their hulls began to glow with a light that did not come from conventional reactors, but from something fundamentally different. Initiating mass energy conversion on a macro scale, Sarah announced, her voice tense. 20 ships entering controlled sacrifice mode. Antimatter reactors being deliberately overloaded. Containment fields configured to direct the explosion into a single vector. Thetavar understood with both horror and admiration. The Terrans were turning 20 of their capital ships into directed bombs, sacrificing them to create an energy blast so massive it would vaporize the hegemons before they could fire. But it was Elena who was ordering the deaths of thousands of her own people. As if reading Thetavar's thoughts, Elena opened an internal channel. A holographic image showed the interiors of the 20 doomed battleships. They were completely empty. Entirely AI-operated ships, Elena explained calmly. No human crew. We developed this capability exactly for moments like this, where sacrifice is necessary, but human lives don't have to be the price. The 20 battleships accelerated in perfect formation, building speed while their reactors entered a cascade overload. The hegemons tried a desperate interception, but the dimensional shields of the suicide ships absorbed everything the Imperials threw at them. 15 seconds before impact, 20 AI captains transmitted in unison, their synthesized voices carrying an echo of the personalities programmed by their human creators. For those who come after, for those we protect, for a future where tyranny does not rule unopposed, we offer this sacrifice freely. May our extinction ensure that the innocent live. Phoenix Protocol, executing in 3, 2, 1. The 20 ships hit the 3 hegemons simultaneously. What followed was not an explosion in the conventional sense. It was the annihilation of matter on a scale that normally only occurred in stellar cores. The energy released turned an entire section of space into incandescent white plasma so intense that sensors had to filter out entire spectrums just to keep functioning. When the brightness finally dissipated, the 3 hegemons simply didn't exist anymore, nor did any Imperial ship within 100 miles of them. 350 Imperial ships reduced to atomic components in a fraction of a second. The silence that descended was the silence of minds confronting their own mortality. Of the 517 ships Krixthor had brought, fewer than 80 remained operational. And of those, most were damaged, disorganized, and psychologically broken by witnessing destruction that defied comprehension. Elena transmitted one last time, her voice cutting through the shock. Lord Admiral Krixthor, I will offer clemency one last time. Surrender now, and your surviving crews will be treated according to the conventions of war. Your soldiers will go home. You will face a tribunal for war crimes, but your lives will be spared. Continue fighting, and you will learn that humans can be as relentless as they are compassionate. The response was a long, defeated silence. Then finally, Krixthor's voice, all his pride evaporated, leaving only an exhausted survivor. Terran forces, I accept surrender, ordering all remaining units to deactivate weapons and shields. Please, let this madness end. 3 weeks after the battle the galaxy would come to call the breaking of Charon, Thetavar stood on the surface of a terraformed moon that the humans had transformed into a thriving garden in the depths of the nebula. The sky above was a spectacle of impossible colors. Clouds of ionized gas filtering, starlight into shades of purple, emerald, and gold. Trees that Terran botanists had genetically adapted to thrive in light radiation grew in orderly rows, their crystalline leaves tinkling like living jewels. Krevtin stood beside her, his dorsal scales relaxed for the first time since the nightmare had begun. Weeks ago, weeks that felt like lifetimes. It's hard to believe something this beautiful exists in the heart of a nebula we always thought was a death zone, he said softly. Thetavar nodded, watching Valana's children playing with human children near a fountain that recycled water through biological filters the terraformers had developed. The children laughed, a universal language that transcended species and cultures. The humans turned their prison into a paradise, she replied. And now they are offering to share it with anyone who needs it. In the weeks since the Imperial surrender, the Charon Nebula had transformed into something completely unexpected, a beacon of hope for the oppressed of the galaxy. Refugee ships arrived daily, some from species whose worlds had been conquered decades ago, others from rebellions that had finally found the courage to rise up, knowing they were not alone. Each ship was met by Terran rescue teams providing medical assistance, food and temporary shelter, and, crucially, a choice. Eleanor had been clear from the beginning. Refugee was offered without conditions. Refugees could stay in Charon, integrating into Terran society if they wished, or they could receive repaired ships, supplies, and coordinates to safe worlds where they could rebuild their lives independently. There was no coercion, no debt expected, no expectation of eternal loyalty. Just genuine help offered because it was the right thing to do. The concept was so radical that many species were initially suspicious of a trap. Generations living under systems where everything had a price, and every kindness, hidden agenda, made it difficult to accept disinterested generosity. But the humans proved their consistency through actions. Week after week, ship after ship, refugee after refugee, always the same sincere offer, always the same respect for autonomy and choice. "Commander Thetavar," a familiar voice called out. Elena was approaching along the polished gravel path, now wearing civilian clothes instead of a military uniform. In the weeks since the battle, Thetavar had learned that humans made a point of separating military and civilian identities, never allowing war to define their entire existence. "Captain Volkov," Thetavar replied, using the title, even though Elena was technically off duty. Some habits were hard to break. "Please, just Elena here," the human said with a warm smile. "This is a garden of peace, not a war room. I brought something I thought you'd like to see." Elena held out a thin tablet, its screen displaying news broadcasts from hundreds of star systems. Thetavar recognized the formats of dozens of different communication networks, all reporting the same fundamental story. The hegemonic empire was collapsing, not through external military conquest, but through internal rupture. Subjugated worlds, inspired by what they witnessed at Charon, were declaring independence. Imperial military forces, demoralized by the catastrophic defeat, were refusing to fire on their own people. Administrative systems that had functioned through fear and oppression were fragmenting as that fear evaporated, replaced by something more powerful: the belief that change was possible. Terran political analysts estimate that within 6 months, the Empire will cease to exist as a cohesive entity. Elena explained, it will fragment into dozens of smaller states, some democratic, others still authoritarian, but none with the power to terrorize the entire galaxy. Thetavar absorbed the information with a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. And the power vacuum? When empires fall, it's often followed by chaos and civil war. "That's why we're working on something bigger," Elena said, gesturing for Thetavar to follow her. They walked through the garden toward a structure on the horizon, a massive dome made of translucent material that glowed with a soft light. "What we're tentatively calling the Galactic Sanctuary Accord," Elena continued. "It's not a central government, because humans learned painfully that centralized power always tends toward corruption. Instead, it's a mutual protection network. Worlds that agree to basic principles of non-aggression, refugee protection, and peaceful dispute resolution receive a guarantee of assistance in case of external invasion. Crevton listened intently. Essentially, a collective defense pact, but who arbitrates disputes over who violated the principles? A rotating council composed of representatives from all signatory species. Elena replied. No permanent members, no veto powers, just equal votes. And crucially, no military forces of its own. If military action is necessary, it must be approved by a 2/3 majority and executed by volunteer forces from the members. They reached the dome and the door slid silently open. The interior revealed a circular amphitheater where representatives from dozens of species were gathered, talking in small groups through universal translators. Theta Var recognized many. Merchants from Vega who had answered the call during the battle, miners from Rigel, representatives from the Carlos Resistance. But there were also new faces, emissaries from worlds that had just won their freedom, watching the proceedings with a mix of hope and careful skepticism. The first session of the Provisional Council, Elena said. We're still establishing procedures, but the goal is clear. To create a structure where small worlds have an equal voice to the large ones, where military strength does not equal political authority, and where the oppressed know they will never be alone again. A tall human with dark skin approached, his face marked by lines that spoke of years carrying heavy responsibilities. Eleanor made formal introductions. Commander Theta Var, this is Secretary General David Okonkwo, the elected civilian representative of the Terran Conclave. David, this is the commander who started it all with a message of defiance that echoed through the stars. Okonkwo extended his hand in the human greeting Theta Var now recognized. Commander, your people suffered terribly, but your courage in documenting that suffering and calling the galaxy to account inspired a silent revolution. Every word of your final transmission has been studied by billions. You have become a symbol of resistance against injustice. Theta Var felt uncomfortable with the praise. Secretary General, I only did what any leader would do. I tried to protect my people and ensure our extinction wasn't forgotten. The humans did the real work. And that humility is exactly why we'd like to make a formal proposal, Okonkwo said. The Valanis people have a well-deserved reputation for diplomacy and skillful mediation. Your cultural contributions to political philosophy and conflict resolution are studied throughout the civilized galaxy. We would like to invite you to serve as one of the first members of the Arbitral Council, helping to shape the principles and procedures that will guide this new organization. Theta Var looked at Elena, seeking guidance. The human captain just smiled encouragingly. The decision is yours, Theta Var, but I can honestly say I can't think of anyone better qualified. You understand both the costs of inaction and the value of principles held in the face of impossible odds. Before Theta Var could respond, movement at the entrance of the amphitheater caught their attention. A delegation was arriving, and its composition caused a murmur of surprise to ripple through the room. They were Imperial officers, but not in uniforms of conquest. They wore simple civilian clothes, carrying diplomatic credentials from 3 worlds that had declared independence from the Empire in the last week. The leader of the delegation, an individual of the same species as Crixthor, but clearly younger, approached Elena with a posture that blended respect and caution. Terran representatives, he said, through a translator, I come from the world of Krinvar. my home planet, which declared secession from the Empire 4 days ago. Our provisional government wishes to explore the possibility of joining the Sanctuary Accord. We understand there may be justified reluctance to accept imperial worlds. Elena studied him for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Then, to the surprise of many present, she smiled. Representative of Krinvar, the principles of the Accord are clear. Any world that renounces aggression, accepts refugees, and commits to the peaceful resolution of disputes is welcome. We do not judge peoples by the sins of their former leaders. We judge them only by the choices they make now and the promises they make for the future. The relief on the representative's face was palpable. Thank you. Our people carry guilt for the atrocities committed in the name of the Empire. Many of us want to make reparations, but didn't know how. This accord offers a path. Thetavar watched the exchange with growing understanding. The humans weren't simply breaking an old empire, they were building something new from the pieces, offering redemption even to those who had been the oppressors. It was audaciously idealistic and pragmatically brilliant at the same time. In the hours that followed, Thetavar witnessed debates over the fundamental principles of the Accord. Delegates from vastly different worlds discussed, argued, and compromised, working through deep cultural differences to find common ground. It was chaotic and messy and wonderful in ways no empire could ever replicate, because it came not from top-down imposition, but from the genuine collaboration of equals. When the session finally ended, Ilona took Thetavar and Krevton to an observatory at the top of the dome. Through the crystal windows, they could see the nebula in all its glory, but also ships arriving and departing in steady patterns. 23,000 refugees this week alone, Elena said calmly, each one with a story of suffering, each one deserving of compassion. And we managed to help every single one because we understand what it means to be a refugee without hope. She turned to Thetavar. So, Commander, will you accept the position on the Council? Will you help us ensure that we never again allow cries for help to echo without an answer? Thetavar thought of her people, of the 40,000 who had survived, because humans refused to accept that genocide was inevitable. She thought of the billions who didn't survive, whose names were now being carved into a Valanis memorial, inspired by the human version. She thought of the children playing in a garden built in the depths of a nebula that should have been a prison, but became a sanctuary through a determination that turned the impossible into a routine. Yes, she said simply, it would be an honor to serve. Elena smiled, genuinely moved. Then welcome officially, Councillor Thetavar. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Krevton, who had observed everything with thoughtful silence, finally spoke. Captain Volkov, may I ask a question that has intrigued me since we met? Of course. Why do you do all this? You could have easily built an empire of your own, conquered worlds, instead of liberating them. With your superior technology, the entire galaxy would be within your reach. Why choose the harder path? Elena looked through the window at the nebula beyond, her eyes distant with memories of a history Thetavar now knew intimately. Because, Officer Krevton, when we were the ones who needed help, when we were the ones screaming in the dark, no one came. And that pain, that betrayal of ignored hope, shaped every decision we made in the 300 years that followed. She turned to face them directly. You might think that would make us bitter, vengeful, eager to inflict on others what we suffered, and some humans certainly argued for exactly that. But the majority of us decided something different. We decided that the best revenge against a universe that abandoned us wasn't to become cruel like those who hurt us. It was to become what we wished had existed when we needed it: defenders of the innocent, a sanctuary for refugees. The answer we never received. She gave a small, sad smile. You ask why we do this? We do it because we remember. And because we remember, we promised that no one else would ever have to go through what we went through alone. Not as long as humanity exists to answer the call. The silence that followed was reverent, sacred in its own way. It was broken by a soft alert. Sarah Chen appeared at the entrance of the observatory. Elena, sorry to interrupt, but we have an urgent hyperspace transmission. It's from Lord Admiral Crixthor, from the tribunal where he's being held. He's asking to speak with you and Commander Thetavar. Elena and Thetavar exchanged surprised looks, but nodded. Sarah activated the holographic projector. The image of Crixthor that appeared was vastly different from the arrogant creature they had faced in battle. He was thinner, his chitinous plates dull, his compound eyes showing deep fatigue. Captain Vance, High Admiral Thetavar, he said, his voice carrying the weight of accepted defeat. I know I don't deserve your time, but I requested this communication to do something I never thought I would. He paused, clearly struggling with his words. I was wrong. About you, about the Valanis, about everything the Empire stood for. I've spent 20 cycles in court, listening to the testimony of victims, seeing evidence of atrocities I either commanded or allowed. I cannot undo those acts. I cannot bring back the dead. His voice trembled. But I can testify. I can provide every record, every order, every communication that documents Imperial crimes. I can ensure history knows the full truth, without sanitization or revisionism. It is insignificant compared to what I destroyed, but it is all I have to offer. Thetavar felt conflicting emotions. This was the commander who had ordered the extermination of her people. But he was also an individual confronting the monstrosity of his actions and trying, however inadequately, to make amends. High Admiral, she said carefully, I cannot forgive on behalf of the dead. That authority does not belong to me, but I can acknowledge the courage required to confront the truth of your own actions. Your testimony will help ensure that future generations understand the real costs of tyranny. That has value. Crixthor nodded slowly. Thank you, Commander. It is more than I deserve. He looked at Elena. Captain Vance, there is an irony in all of this. The Empire taught us that strength was all that mattered, that compassion was a weakness to be exploited, that the only rule was to rule or be ruled. He made a sound the translator interpreted as a bitter laugh. And then you showed up, humans supposedly extinct, armed with the very compassion the Empire mocked as weakness. And you broke our Empire not despite that compassion, but because of it. Because it inspired others to stand up. Because it offered an alternative that was worth fighting for. Elena listened with a neutral expression. High Admiral, compassion was never a weakness. It is an active choice, often much harder than cruelty. It requires strength to extend a hand to a fallen enemy, to offer mercy when vengeance would be easier. The Empire mistook brutality for power. You learned the hard way The true strength comes from principles you don't abandon even when they cost you dearly. Crixthor nodded. I will carry the lessons I've painfully learned for as long as I have left. I hope they serve as a warning to others who might walk the Imperial path. Thank you for listening to A Prisoner of War. Crixthor, signing off. The transmission ended, leaving them in a contemplative silence. Do you think he's really changed? Crevton asked. Or is he just a survivor saying what he needs to say to get better treatment? Elena considered it carefully. Probably both. Genuine transformation is rarely pure or complete. But whether it's sincerity or opportunism matters less than the result. A full record of Imperial crimes for the historical record. Future generations will learn from this. She turned back to the window, watching another refugee ship approaching for docking. And that is what we've really built here. Not just a physical sanctuary, but a living record of why compassion matters, why justice is worth pursuing, and why a universe where the innocent are protected is worth every effort necessary to create it. Theta Var joined her at the window. In the distance, she could see the lights of human cities built into asteroids, orbital farms feeding millions, and shipyards building vessels, not for war, but for exploration and trade. You turned exile into a rebirth, she said softly. You took the pain of abandonment and forged it into a purpose that is reshaping the galaxy. It is extraordinary. Elena placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of camaraderie. We didn't do it alone, Commander, and we won't continue alone. This is the beginning of something bigger than humanity. It is the awakening of a galactic conscience, a shared understanding that we are all responsible for one another. She smiled, her eyes shining with hope, forged through centuries of struggle. The silence that killed civilizations is being broken, and in its place, we are building a chorus of voices, all singing the same refrain. Never again. Never again will we stand idly by. Never again will we ignore the cries of the innocent. Never again will we allow the universe to be ruled by fear instead of hope. Theta Var looked at the humanity the galaxy had abandoned, who survived against all odds, and who emerged not with rage, but with the determination to ensure no one else would ever suffer a similar abandonment. Humanity truly deserves the title the galaxy never gave them, she said. Not conquerors or warriors, though you are both when necessary, but guardians. Watchmen who answer when others cry out in the dark. Elena nodded, accepting the recognition with humble grace. And now, Councillor Theta Var, we build together. Humanity, the Valanis, and everyone who chooses to join us. We have a galaxy to reshape, lives to protect, and a future to create. As they watched through the crystal window, more lights appeared against the Yum Nebula. More ships arriving, more refugees seeking sanctuary, more worlds sending delegates to the emerging council. The era of unopposed tyranny was over. The era of the Sanctuary Accord had begun, and in the heart of the Charon Nebula, where humanity had turned a prison into a garden, hope bloomed like impossible flowers under alien skies, sustained by a simple but absolute promise. You will never be alone again. You will never be abandoned again. You will never have to scream into the void without an answer. Because humanity remembers. And because they remember, they ensure no one else will ever forget the value of reaching out to those in need. This is the awakening from the silence, and it is only the beginning. The end. If humanity's tenacity and the transformation of despair into hope inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more Chronicles from the Galactic Frontier, where we'll discover together that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are those who refuse to accept that the impossible remains impossible.